Our first speaker tonight is Nic Stone. Nic is an Atlanta native and a Spelman College graduate. She is the author of a number of books, including New York Times bestsellers Dear Martin and Clean Getaway, Odd One Out, a novel about discovering oneself and who it is okay to love, was an NPR Best Book of the Year, and Dear Justice, the sequel to Dear Martin, came out last fall. In her own words, I like to keep it fresh, voicey and textured, and I frequently utilize interesting elements to deliver narrative, like letters, transcripts, script style, dialogue, etc. And inspiration is everywhere. Just got to stay open to being smacked upside the head with it. Welcome everyone, please, to Nic Stone, here to smack us upside the head. Thank you, Nic.
I'm actually going to tell a story about me getting smacked upside the head. So let's go back a little bit, a lot of it. We're going to go back to 2012, June 27th, 2012, 5:32 a.m. I was in bed with my partner, and we actually hadn't been home for very long. We had gone to see Men in Black 3 the night before. 5:32 a.m. though, I felt like I had to pee. So I get up and I realize that it's not pee that I need to do. I missed the fact here. The fact is that I was 9 months pregnant and this was my due date. So I get up, notice that this is certainly not what I thought it was, and I go to the bathroom and realize that my water has broken. And when I say broken, it has broken significantly. So we get in the car, we go get my doula. I, being the hard ass that I am, decided I was going to do a natural birth away from a hospital in the cabin of a midwife in Yashresh, Israel. So at this time, I was living in Jerusalem, and we decided to do this natural thing. So we go out to this cabin in Yashresh, and for the next 4.5 hours, I basically screamed my head off. I had very, very close contractions. I would go from laying prone on a bed in this birthing cabin. I tried to get in a tub, like we ran water so I could try to do a water birth, but I couldn't sit down. So I go from laying prone on this bed to feeling these contractions lifting me up off the bed, where I would go and stand against a table and lean forward and literally scream in some form of tongues. No idea where this language came from. I just know that every time I had a contraction, that was what I was screaming. And then it came time to push, which was an entirely different experience than anything I've ever experienced before. It kind of feels like you have to go poop, but it's a lot more intense. I was very afraid that I was going to go poop in the process of trying to get this human being out of my body. But after pushing for a couple of minutes, I hear a popping sound. We will not get into what that sound was. Shortly thereafter, though, I hear a child. The midwife takes the baby, lays the baby on my stomach, and the first words out of my mouth upon seeing my son were, "Whose little white baby is this?" My husband is biracial. His mother is Russian Jewish and his father is Nigerian. And my son came out with very little melanin. The interesting thing, though, is that my kid is not white, which is something that became salient about 5 months later. This is November 23rd, 2012. I, in my Jerusalem apartment, hear about an incident in Jacksonville, Florida, involving a young man named Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis was 17 years old. He and his friends went to a convenience store one night. They had their music cranked up real loud. They're sitting in the parking lot. A man pulls in next to them, decides that he doesn't like this music that they're listening to, and he especially does not like the volume at which they are listening to this music. He starts an argument with these kids, and within 3.5 minutes, he had pulled out a firearm and started shooting. In this incident, Jordan Davis lost his life. 17, high school senior, bright future ahead of him. And it was in this moment that I recognized that I had given birth to a Black boy. I'd heard about the Trayvon Martin story a little earlier in the year. And it didn't hit me as hard as Jordan Davis did. And I think it didn't hit me as hard as Jordan Davis did because I didn't actually have my own child in my arms yet. But once I had my own child in my arms, and I realized that my child would one day be tall and brown, there's going to come a time when people look at my kid and they decide that he's a threat before they see him as a person. It really stirred something up in me. What? I wasn't quite sure yet, but I knew that there was something. Fast forward, 2013, I read a book called Divergent by a woman named Veronica Roth. Loved the story. The first 2 books of this trilogy had come out, so I read them back to back, and then I started over and I read them again. Later on, I realized that the reason I'd read these books and why they had stuck with me so intensely is because this was my first time reading a book series where a Black character who looks like me, a Black female character, does not die in the first book. As a matter of fact, this Black character had a pretty pivotal role in this story. And it was in discovering that, wait, Black people can survive an apocalypse in a book, that I came to realize I could write a book. If this girl in this book could survive all of these things, I could write a book about girls who look like me as the protagonist instead of a side character. This was a huge moment for me, largely because I grew up not seeing myself in anything. I saw myself on TV a bit, but I didn't see myself in books. And that's a big deal. When you're told you have to read books and you're never in them, it sends a message. So getting to a point where I figured that I could actually write a book was a huge deal. 2014, I hear about the death of a young man named Michael Brown. Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. By this time, I had started writing. I was writing a book about a Black girl who glowed in the dark and was prophesied to defeat darkness. It was the tropiest thing in the world. Like, there was a forbidden lovers trope. There was an enemies to lovers trope. There was a prophecy trope. There was a chosen one trope. I crammed it all into this book, and this book was my heart and soul. Mike Brown is killed in 2014 in the fall. And the things that I felt around the death of Jordan Davis kind of reared back up. Part of the reason they reared back up is because I kept seeing, in response to the protests, there were protests happening around the death of Mike Brown that did not happen around the death of Jordan Davis, but I kept hearing people say that Dr. King would not have supported these protests. And that's when it came to me that if I wanted my sons, because I have 2 of them now, to live in a world that was different than the one I inhabited, to see themselves in story, I was going to have to be the one to write them. So from screaming on a bed in a random cabin in the middle of nowhere in Israel to now having published book number 7, I cannot stop, because if I stop, who's going to continue this story from this moment on? Thank you.